On behalf of the Foreign Affairs Institute, I would like to welcome our viewers to tonight's webinar called The New Mediterranean, Geopolitics in a Volatile Region. Tonight we have the great honor of hosting two great researchers who I also have the honor of calling my good friends. So without further ado, I would like to present our two guests. From Cairo, Egypt, we have Mr. Hany Farouk Ghoraba. Good evening, Mr. Ghoraba.
Good evening, sir. Good evening to you and your audience.
Thank you for being tonight with us. Mr. Ghoraba is a security and policy analyst at Ahram Weekly. He's a senior fellow at Investigative Project of Terrorism based in Washington, D.C. He has written extensively on the Islamist phenomenon, on external relations, on U.S. foreign policy. He's a commentator on BBC and other foreign media, and one of the leading analysts in Egypt and the greater region on the issues that we shall discuss tonight. So, Hany, a great pleasure to have you tonight.
Pleasure is all mine, Dr. Young. Thank you very
much. From Wien, Austria, we have another great researcher, Mr. Wolfgang Pusztai, who is a senior, who is an analyst, is a chairman of the advisory board of the National Council on U.S. Libya Relations. He's a senior advisor of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy and director of Perim Associates. He has held various positions in the Austrian Ministry of Defense, and he was also the defense attaché of Austria to Italy, Greece, Tunisia, and Libya, and he spent some time on the ground during the Arab Spring in these regions, so he has a lot of expertise that he can share with us, not only concerning Libya, but on the whole MENA region. Good evening, dear Wolfgang.
Thank you very much for your kind welcome, and thank you for the invitation.
The pleasure is all mine. So, we can begin to present the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is a very interesting region with a lot of events and a lot of rebalancing and repositioning, geopolitical repositioning. We can begin with the issue of the exclusive economic zones in the Mediterranean, which is a crucial issue and a point of interest of many coastal and states with sea borders, and especially for Greece. So, dear Hany, I would like you to comment on that recent decision by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to demarcate the exclusive economic zone of Egypt to the west on the part that adjoins the Libyan one. We had a unilateral declaration by Egypt, and one that, interestingly enough, intersects the part of the Turkish-Libyan delimitation that was made by the Sarraj Memorandum back in 2019. So your comments on that and on the general situation.
Thank you for your question. Well, the president's decision wouldn't have been something strange since Egypt is committed to its obligations and deals signed with both Cyprus and Greece for demarcation of the EEZ in particular, and the naval borders of Egypt and Libya has not been of much contention till recently. Especially with Islamist governments taking over, and their attempts to circumvent the Egyptian Greek or Egyptian Cypriot deals with by dealing directly with Turkey without having Egypt having a say on that, and that couldn't have the deal you have just mentioned in 2019. Cannot be treated as a legal one. It has not been approved by anyone in the region, and just insane to begin with, as it circumvents all the players in the region and their navy. So the president's decision last week was simply just to reassert that Egypt's commitments are the same towards Greece and towards Cyprus, especially that there has been some voices after President Sisi met with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Qatar during the opening of the World Cup, and some believe read too much into that. To be honest, I mean, it could have been a handshake with anyone present in the during the course of the games and so on. It's just more protocol. Yes, there have been attempts to from the Turks, but mainly to try to reproach with the Egyptians after all the support they have done to the Muslim Brotherhood and how that affected negatively affected the relations with Turkey. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that a handshake would mean that everything else would be forgotten. That our commitments to our allies, such as Greece and Cyprus, as well as the rest of the region, as well as the legitimacy of such deals, that they cannot be first, they cannot be signed without the consent of the rest of the region. At the same time, they cannot be signed with a temporary government, such in the ones in Libya, without because that cannot go. And while Aquila is trying to play games here and there and trying to hold the stick from the middle, but it can't go like that. And this was a direct message which angered the Libyans, I know, but it is Egypt's naval borders, and we cannot let the political games behind the scenes between the Turkish regime and the current Libyan regime circumvent that. So to me that wasn't very surprising, but the timing was very crucial because what I said, that people read too much about this into this handshake between the president and Erdogan, and while there may be a room for relations improvement, it will not by any means mean that we would forget our commitments and allies, and that was the reason that this decision was very important.
Exactly, and I would like to comment on that, some people in Greece also thought that with this handshake, Egypt would revert its foreign policy. We should not be hasty. We should not read too much in just a casual meeting. But do you think that perhaps there was an attempt by Qatar to bring together or more closely Egypt and Turkey? Could there be some sort of attempt?
That's actually true. Behind the scenes, there were visits by Qatari Prince Tamim bin Hamad to Egypt initially, then followed by a visit by Sisi and an attendance to the World Cup. And I believe that during these meetings, Turkey has been brought as a subject as negotiations. There were other attempts by different parties around the region to try to bring the points of views closer, but Egypt's stance was clear. The hostilities towards Egypt were initiated by the Turks, and just for them to say, "Okay, please forgive us," or so on, it has to be done into actions on the ground. And thus far, even if they try to get rid of some of the Muslim Brotherhood elements or some of the TV networks that has been broadcasting hostile messages from Istanbul, and so that may have been one of many Egyptian demands in order to get normalization back to track, but it's certainly not enough. And as it happens, the Erdogan's credibility as a leader who keeps his word is almost close to zero, because even he says one thing, the next week he says different things. He come for years he's been trying to oust, for example, President Bashar al-Assad of Syria, and a few weeks that he said he's willing to negotiate. He's he's too impetuous and too haphazard in his actions that to be trusted by anyone. not just by Egyptians, but anyone in the region. I mean, the Europeans got fed up of him. The Arabs got fed up of him. His incursions in both in Iraq and Syria and the rest of the region are not exactly met with welcome, but they are met with condemnation by everyone. And hence, to trust a person like that, it's not personal, as you understand, but also there has to be political actions on the ground that prove this. And the Egyptian administration has not seen any to justify a full normalization with Turkey thus far. And even with full normalization, even that happens through the next year or the other, it doesn't mean that we'll forget our commitments with our friends and allies, such as Greece and Cyprus and European Union and so on, and other Arabs and so on. So we can't forget our commitment just because we want to normalize with Turkey. We're not. There's no incentive to move forward with a regime that has betrayed even its closest allies, and at the same time, it has commitments towards its neighbors, as well as Libya itself. That we cannot let Turks the Libyan decision come from Istanbul or Ankara by means. So that's why the last week's decision was crucial, but it was expected, as I told you.
Thank you. Dear Wolfgang, the whole situation with the exclusive economic zones was intensified and began with 2019 Sarraj's Turkish memorandum, one of two, that actually demarcated, according to the Turkish view and the view of the Tripoli government, their respective EEZs. So could you please comment on the relations between the Tripoli government and Turkey and the influence of Turkey in Libya all these years, and especially the current situation?
Let me start with some brief words about the geostrategic significance of the Eastern Mediterranean. In the Eastern Mediterranean, we have one of the world's most important shipping lanes, namely the route from Gibraltar to the Suez Canal. And the Suez Canal is of vital strategic importance, not only for Egypt, but also for Europe and also for the United States. With regards to the natural resources, we are right now at the beginning of a technical, rather difficult exploitation of hydrocarbons. And this is even more significant in the light of the Ukraine-Russia war, and this sets the stage for all these events. Actually, the Eastern Mediterranean is surrounded what I would like to call a crisis arc. We have a crisis, we have difficulties in the Aegean Sea, we have Turkish claims about the exclusive economic zone. We have Cyprus, which is a divided island. We have the conflict in Syria. We have an unstable Lebanon. We have still the Palestine conflict. We have an ongoing Islamist insurgency in the Sinai. And we have, of course, the Libya conflict. We have several migration routes running through this area, from Turkey to Egypt, from the Middle East to, from Turkey to Greece, from the Middle East to Greece, from Egypt to Greece and to Italy. This is of significance for Europe. This is of very high significance for Europe. And please don't forget, they have the presence of major powers from outside of the region in the region. We have American, British, and Russian military bases there. We have an enhanced French presence in this region since about 2 to 3 years in the light of an increasingly aggressive Turkish foreign policy. And all this sets also the stage for what's going on right now in Libya and between Libya and Turkey about the Maritime Memorandum of Understanding. Let me stress, in 2019, in November, the Libyan government was under siege by the Libyan National Army from Marshal Khalifa Haftar. They had next to no choice. When the Turks pushed them that for the military aid, they want them to sign this Memorandum of Understanding, they did so. On the other side, this must be also seen in the light of the dire economic situation in Turkey and the huge need for energy of Turkey, as well as Turkey's Mavi Vatan, Blue Homeland doctrine, an expansionist strategic doctrine, which is a problem not only for Greece, and Cyprus, but probably also for Egypt and for the whole of the European Union. It was developed by the retired Admiral Jihad Yachi, an ultranationalist. It is based on an own interpretation of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. Actually, it denies islands a continental shelf. And this is in sharp contrast to the Law of the Sea. The Law of the Sea questions, yes, it's true, the continental shelf of very small islands, but they certainly not question the continental shelf of islands like Cyprus, Rhodes, or Crete. The International Court of Justice has expressed in various cases that the size of islands matters with regard of the delimitation of the economic exclusive zones. So this means, for example, the tiny little island please help me, Ioannis, Castellorizzo of Castellorizzo, may be something to be discussed, might be something to be discussed. But there is certainly no debate about Cyprus. There is no debate about Crete. And this Mavivatan doctrine is not only a problem, as I said before, for Greece and for Egypt. It is also, if it would be accepted, it would be also a problem for other islands like Malta. It would be a problem for Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, for Spain. Keep in mind the Balearic Islands. So from my point of view, it is definitely necessary to deal with this aggressive Turkish foreign policy now, before it becomes an even bigger problem. Sidestep, Ioannis, to be cut out thereof. Do you want me to discuss now about Libya? Because you had Libya as a second question further down.
I think we can discuss Libya as topic 3.
Yes, because you have right now in the question you have mentioned Libya, and I did not.
Yes, now just general remarks about the relationship, about the regime. Please tell us a bit that's how Turkey has supported the GNU governments.
I will come to this later on more in detail, but I will say a few words right now also. So again, for recording. With regard to the significance of the Libyan-Turkish relations, it must be said that Turkey is for the Libyan government in Tripoli. We have two governments right now. For the Libyan government in Tripoli, something like an insurance. As I said in the beginning, the government in Tripoli has no choice. They need to rely on the Turkish military presence in Libya to defend them, if necessary, against the Libyan National Army. So all this makes this discussion and negotiations about the withdrawal of the Turkish military presence from Libya extremely difficult, extremely tricky.
Great, thank you very much. To conclude our first section, that is the exclusive economic zones.
May I ask Dr. Wolfgang about what would Haftar's role be in this situation, leading the significant portion of the Libyan army? Would he be part of any future negotiations on forming a proper national army, a unified army for the entire country, or he's just shunned at the moment?
Well, I'm not sure how Libya will look like in the next 1, 2, or 3 years, but I'm pretty sure that within 10 years, Libya will be either a federalist state or it will be broken up in a bloody civil war. Oh. And in both scenarios, Khalifa Haftar definitely has a role. Please let me stress that from my point of view, the international policy was for by far too long time, too much Haftar-centric. This is not about Khalifa Haftar. This is more about the justified grievances of the population in the East. So the existence, the influence of Khalifa Haftar would not be here if the problems would be solved. So this means if the eastern part of Libya would receive the justified share of the oil revenues, there wouldn't be a need for them to turn to Khalifa Haftar. So the more difficult the situation for the Libyans in the East, the more difficult the situation for the Libyans in the South is, the more influential, the more powerful Khalifa Haftar gets. And I will come back to this later on during our discussion. It seems to be that his role will increase in the near future again because of the increasing troubles on the ground.
So to conclude our section on the exclusive economic zones, let me note that so far Greece has signed an agreement to demarcate its EEZ with Italy. we have signed a partial demarcation agreement with Egypt back in August 2020. This is an agreement that we need to work together and perhaps come up with a plan for a full delimitation when the time is right in the near future, because there is a clause that neither Greece nor Egypt can sign an agreement with another state, meaning Cyprus, without the consent of either state. So we have to work together. This was done explicitly to promote cooperation between the three states, Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt. And we have, of course, Egypt's agreement with Cyprus. So there is a great also possibility that Greece shall sign a form of agreement with Albania to conclude its northern parts in the Ionian Sea. And we are, the situation, of course, with Libya, between Greece and Libya is difficult, especially with the Tripoli government. But this is an issue that will certainly be part of the whole discussion in the future, the signing of EEZ agreements. So we can now move to our second section, which is the general situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, the new geopolitical landscape that is being formed and is also connected to the EEZ deals, to the tension between Greece and Turkey. This is, of course, an old story going back decades, to the tension we saw in the last decade between Turkey and Egypt, with the interference of Turkey in Egyptian politics, the Turkish revisionism with all these deals with Libya, and the new dynamic policies of both Egypt and Greece. So I would like to pose a question to Mr. Ghoraba about Egypt. Could you please elaborate on the new role of Egypt, the new situation of Egypt under President El-Sisi over the last decade? How has Egypt changed? It is certainly a new rising power, not only in the Mediterranean, but in Africa and the greater region. So could you please tell us a little about Egypt, about this new economic and military power that is emerging?
Well, the Egyptian role in the past decade has definitely changed dramatically, as you kindly mentioned, from just protecting the borders of the Egyptian naval borders and so on, into a bigger role in the region, especially with the excavations and new discoveries of the natural gas, to limiting the influence of the new Ottomans in Turkey, who had bigger ambitions that they may restore the old Ottoman glories, or so, even within economic basis or limited military basis, as mentioned by Dr. Wolfgang earlier. So Egypt had a big role here, and with the ousting of the Muslim Brotherhood, who were in total alliance with Turkey and followed the guidelines set from Ankara here, with the ousting in June 2013, into a massive revolution against the regime of President Mohammed Morsi, there has been a rejuvenated role for Egypt, and it's sort in a miracle comeback. There has been an upscale in the military and reforms within the military ranks, adding new units for the first time in Egypt's history. We have two fleets, the Northern Fleet and the South Fleet in the Red Sea, the 4 mega bases, large bases, lots of military expenditure. At the same time, they came at that correct moment where there has been a big ambitions have been big ambitions from the Turkey trying to exploit the chaos, both in Egypt and Libya back at that time, in order to interfere politically in Egypt and militarily in Libya. With President Sisi policies, we have managed to thwart that threat. And if they were given the chance, they would have made major influence both in Libya and Egypt eventually, as well as God knows other areas in the Red Sea as well. So in that respect, Egypt has managed to put things back in order through President Sisi policies. Economically, we have underwent into a major economic reform and so on, despite having setbacks in this year, particularly namely this year, where has been a lot of devaluations in the currency, given what is happening in the United States and the constant changes in the interest rates by the U.S. Federal, which is affecting the entire regions and so on. Tomorrow, namely, there may be another devaluation to put things back in course. I'm not in favor of these devaluations, but some experts say that they are must. My point of view from them is different, because there's a need to stabilize the currency, at least for a while, till we are done with the mega projects that has been going on. President Sisi has undertaken over 15,000 projects throughout the less than 8 years, all across the country. It's redeveloping everything from infrastructure, roads, railways, all the way to mega agricultural projects and industrial zones and so on. And this is great, but they come at an expense. And a lot of these equipments are imported from European Union, United States, China, Japan, and so on. And once you devaluate your own currency, it means that purchasing these ingredients and equipment will double in price and so on. So I really hope that we could put an end to these devaluations now and focus on finishing what we have started. But the people at the finance ministry have a different say, and I respect that. Of course, they probably know the difference. But overall, Egypt's role has been very significant in the past years, and it will remain significant in the decades to come, thanks to proper policies and proper alliances with friends such as Greece and Cyprus, the European Union, and the Arabian Gulf states, in order that they all saw the big picture of having one country trying to dominate the area with some historical connotations and backed by Islamist ideologies that have no place in the 21st century.
I remember when we had, discussions when we contact that you told me that there is a great transformation in the urban landscape of Egypt, of many cities. Absolutely. So there's a kind of a renaissance in building. So Egypt is actually a country in a transitory phase towards a really stronger position. I should like to remind our viewers that now Egypt is 12th globally in military power. It's the 12th strongest state militarily.
It can be even, but we went as far as being the 10th at the 1 year and so on. These things matter in terms of there are different parameters that economics are included. How long you can sustain a military campaign and so on. The military expert producing, but in terms of sheer military power, we can definitely be among the top 10 easily in terms of military equipment. Without, but they study and research other elements like projection of the military power, the logistics and the economic situation, whereby you can sustain a long-term war. And this can make you fluctuate from the 10s to the 12s to 15s and so on But in terms of the military equipment, Egypt would definitely was in the top 7 or 8 countries in the world, without a doubt.
Thank you. Dear Wolfgang, we see a new geopolitical landscape emerging in the Mediterranean, and the role of energy and energy security is crucial in this aspect. We have, for example, the creation in 2020 of the EastMed Gas Forum, an initiative that is bringing together a lot of countries, and interestingly, not Turkey, but also it includes the Palestinian Authority. This is a very interesting development in the sense that it makes the Mediterranean not just a geopolitical focal point, but also an economical focal point. And especially in times like these, when the energy security of Europe is a crucial issue now with the war in Ukraine. So could you please analyze this new economic landscape in the Mediterranean?
There are confirmed huge deposits off the coast of gas, natural gas, off the coast of Egypt, Israel, and Lebanon. There is probably also a huge amount of gas deposits around Cyprus and south of Crete, but this is not confirmed yet. This is not confirmed yet. These deposits are eventually located in some of the deepest parts of the Mediterranean. This means exploration and exploitation is technically quite challenging. And I've discussed with several energy consulting firms some years ago about this, and they said under that time economic conditions, it is doubtful that this would make sense from an economic point of view. Of course, since Ukraine, this has changed, and now it most likely makes sense. And the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, with its headquarters in Cairo, is the authority to coordinate this. As you know, it is formed by Cyprus, Egypt, France, Greece, Israel, Italy, Jordan, and Palestine, with the European Union and the United States as observers. Turkey is not part of the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, which makes them quite upset. And this might be in the future, if there is a new government in Turkey, and if they are pursuing a more consensual approach, maybe a way to offer them at the beginning an observer status. This EMGF was established unofficially in 2019 and officially in 2020. The objectives are a formation of a competitive regional gas market and coordinating efforts to optimize resources development, which is, of course, highly in the interest of Turkey. Please let me stress, the stability of Turkey is certainly, as you know, also, of course, in the interest of Greece and of highest interest for the Europeans. I do not want to imagine how the destabilized Turkey could affect the migration to Europe. So it is in our interest that Turkey remains a stable country. Unfortunately, the current government doesn't do a lot to allow to help them to remain stable, to get more stable, to overcome their own economic difficulties. And it is quite likely, I would say, that President Erdogan will stay in charge. We'll see. We can discuss this at the end of the session, how the things could develop. In June, the EGMF offered the European Union that they could supply gas to the European Union in order to reduce its dependence on Russia. This would certainly make sense, although it is not realistic that they could replace the whole gas deliveries from Russia. Nevertheless, it would certainly make sense. There was a plan, or there is again a plan, for an EastMed gas pipeline from Israel, Cyprus to Crete and further on to mainland Greece and to Italy. The question is this economically viable? But there are alternatives. There could be liquefaction facilities and LNG export terminals off the coast of Cyprus, off the coast of Crete, which would probably make more sense and are by far cheaper. But the key question remains, how much gas is really there?
Yes, this is a crucial issue. And to connect with Egypt and to return to Hany, Egypt is also a rising power in energy. It exports solar energy. It also has wind farms due to its territorial relief. You've got a lot of production of both solar and wind energy. And now we have these connections between Greece and Egypt with electrical connections. So I think also there is a great increase in natural gas production. And just today, Cyprus discovered a new gas deposit that is actually estimated to be around 3 billion cubic feet. And this is also an interesting discovery. And the energy minister of Cyprus had announced that it will, in all probability, be exported through Egypt, through Damietta, through the installations of Egypt towards Europe. So we see that Egypt is also a great energy player. Could you comment on that? And could you also comment what are the challenges that Egypt faces during this period? You have the GERD issue. You have still some Islamist terrorism in Sinai. And there is also, I think, the issue that President Sisi has raised of the population.
Of course.
I think there was a campaign for the overpopulation. So please comment first about the energy dimension of Egypt as an energy exporter, and then about the challenges that Egypt faces.
Yes, thank you for the question. When President Sisi had came to power in 2014 after he was elected a year after the ousting of Mohamed Morsi, he had this vision of turning Egypt into an energy hub. And many have questioned how exactly we're going to do that, since we are at one time we are importing large amounts of our energy needs from different countries, as well as the overpopulation problem that you kindly mentioned has exacerbated the situation when it comes to energy consumption and so on. But with the discoveries and the record of the natural gas discoveries and the net, particularly, it came at the time where people thought that even if you find natural gas discoveries, doesn't mean that you're able to use them immediately. But in record time, with Italian companies such as Eni and others, they have made all the arrangements that the natural gas would be produced and actually used in record time. I mean, it was in a couple of years that that El Zohr, the largest known natural gas field, was discovered, and in 2 years' time it was operational, which is some sort of a miracle in this kind of field. And hence Egypt didn't just rely on that. The wind energy nearby, particularly the Suez region, Suez Canal region, where some of the windiest regions in the world are located, and hence that happened to help create wind farms as well as solar farms in Aswan, where the sun is almost every day in the year there. And one of the biggest farms there as well has been erected, and others are on the way. This has, along with new fields of energy that will be developed in the next years, which will be the green carbon. And Egypt has signed many memorandum of understandings in order to start the production of green carbon into the next few years. The main target is to, of course, the domestic consumption, but the export to the European Union. And of course, as you know, that the last year has proven that the Russian supplies to Europe are conditional towards the Europeans just healing to all of Putin's demands and so on. And we have seen how that has developed. A lot of wrong energy plans by the European Union, led by Chancellor Angela Merkel, for example, didn't materialize into positive matters. And we have seen in the first crisis with Russia, now they have the natural gas and petroleum as a weapon against the Europeans, and that can't stand. And hence there has been the importance of developing different sorts of different and alternative energy sources on immediate basis, just like importing directly from the Arabian Gulf or North America or so on, and from Egypt, of course, as well as developing their own alternative energy. Maybe resetting, reconsidering their stance on nuclear facilities as well, which delivers with the latest technologies can produce clean energy just as it was supposed to be before, and so on. Egypt now may have a great opportunity, along with Greece and Cyprus, especially with new discoveries almost every year now in the region. Has been declared that they could satisfy the needs for the European Union, at least for the forthcoming years, in terms of at least natural gas. Shipments have been ongoing from Damietta port, which has the advantage of being the only country, I mean by Egypt, the only country which has great liquefaction, natural gas liquefaction facilities, and that helped a lot. These natural gas liquefaction facilities have been around for over a decade, even before 2011, and they haven't been as fully functional as they were in the past few years, which is a plus. Now they are fully functional and serving to satisfy the needs of the European Union. I never noticed. I forgot what other question did you have?
The other question was the challenges that Egypt faces, the debt issue, the overpopulation, and
Ethiopia. With Ethiopia, Egypt has taken the long-term negotiation policies and policy as Ethiopia is an African country, and Egypt is one of the founding members of the African Union. And Egypt doesn't see that using military alternative at the current moment is a viable one or a good one, because as you can see, it's military alternatives in any or any military opening up a new military struggle. It's always easy to start a war, but it's never easy to end. At the same time, even if we, from my perspective, it could not be a long-term war. It could be a military strike. But at the same time, I don't see it. I don't see this giving an efficient way to solve a long-term problem. At the same time, if the Ethiopians, who have their own civil wars and domestic issues, continue on this path, there could be different talks other than what we're having. Egypt has taken the peaceful stance on this, not because it lacks military, lacks the military means that we could do it. As you know, and we have mentioned, it's a matter of hours that this whole matter could be resolved, but it would have a profound effect on the future generations. And launching the war is never the best way. It has to be the absolute last resort. Okay. There are lives that will be lost, and even if it's not lost, it will it will hinder any way to normalize normal relationship with Ethiopia in the future if a war is launched. That's for certain. At the same time, you see the whole world. Is not even with understanding Egypt's needs are not exactly supportive of any military action towards there, and hence Egypt is seeking all sorts of intervention from the European Union as well as the United States during the last visit last week by President Sisi to and his meeting with President Biden in the United States. He asked that the United States should be involved into this matter. President Trump was involved for a while, then he got his own domestic problems and the COVID-19 issues and so on, and things got overlooked. What is happening now is that I see that the Ethiopians have slowed down the pace of their building than they had, whether it was for technical reasons or financial reasons. They have slowed the building, understanding that trying to cut water will mean it's an act of war against Egypt immediately. So they have been slowing down the filling of the dam to one time at a year at a certain period with the negotiations with the Egyptians and the Sudanese who are involved in this as well. And this represents a serious problem with them. But at the same time, they are not willing to commit to a long-term agreement with the Egyptians or the Sudanese, which is Egypt and Sudan are rejecting. We have to come to terms with an agreement. What would happen? What could happen during a time of drought or so on? And talks about building other dams on the river and so on would be considered as an act of war towards Egypt and Sudan, and hence this would expedite matters to a stand that Egypt will find no alternative than to bring this down. But breaking down a dam is not a simple matter, though we have the means, the military means, and do it. But it's not a simple matter, as I explained before. As for the insurgency, the Islamic jihadist and the terrorist activities in Sinai, I have to admit that they have been contained to a great extent since the past year and this year. And the operations, though they are not totally down, the operations have been limited to a great extent thanks to the efforts and sacrifices by the Egyptian army and police forces in Sinai. And I have to point out that these operations were mainly in North Sinai, not the rest of Sinai. Sinai is around 60,000 kilometers long. It's almost the size of Scotland, or something. And these activities have been mainly in the northern part of there. It's still crucial. It's still dangerous to neglect that. And I don't think the Egyptian administration is neglecting that by any means. But the Egyptian army has successfully managed to contain this threat to a great extent. I could say over 90%. Success in this so far.
I see.
So these are mainly the challenges that's being faced now. But at the same time, the Egyptian administration has successfully managed to separate between these issues with Ethiopia or North Sinai and other economic issues and political issues in a manner that everything would be working fine, and that has enabled Egypt to have its tourism revenue back from millions of tourists are visiting the country again, and even in Sinai and other areas that were once deserted by the tourists because of activities here and there, and hence stability is came back actually to these regions. And I think we're going in the right track, with the exception of this economic issue that has touched most of the world, to be honest. But it has to be tackled maybe in a different way by the Egyptian cabinet and in the next few months.
Hany, there is another crucial issue that Ioannis mentioned briefly, and this is the demographic challenge. Egypt has right now 107 million inhabitants, and if the estimates are true, then within the next 35 years, the population will double again. President Al-Sisi, as Ioannis said, had already mentioned this, and I would say, knowing a little bit about Egypt, its geography and its economic power and the agricultural areas, there is no way that more than 220 million people could be sustained in Egypt. What's your point about this challenge?
Yeah, well, there has to be a drastic measure towards this major problem, and which is swallowing up any economic revenues or any economic gains. I've been an advocate of limiting the birth rates to two per family, and if a third one comes, then it should not have any subsidies, because up till now the government is giving subsidies even if you have 9 kids in your family. They get free education. Well, if you call it free, because everything is more expensive now than they were a couple of decades ago. But they're getting the free healthcare, free education, and so on. And this has to be limited to a kid or two. We have to go into more drastic measures, because this can't continue, and this can't stand any longer. The problem lies is that this kind of big birth rate comes from areas that are not as highly educated as the rest. I mean, highly educated people hardly ever brings more than 2 or 3. That would be a big deal. And the other in rural areas would go as far as 8 or 9, and so on. And they expect the government or the subsidies to cover their expenses all their life, and so on. It's like a free lunch for everyone, and that can't stand any longer. And it has to be taken down dramatically. The president has to call upon other authorities which had a negative impact on this issue, which is the religious authorities, while other, I mean, and so on. They have not been vocal enough to say to have their say, and make sure that the people are abiding by normal birth rates or so on. In fact, they have been conducive of people bringing new kids and saying that well, this may deviate from the subject a bit, but there is they keep releasing a Prophet Muhammad saying that the more people they bring, he will show to God in the end and be proud of them, and so on. And it has been conducive for people to get more kids, and it's becoming irrational. You have to think that in the early 1980s, we have been nearly 40 million people. Now into 2020, that's 2022, and that's around 40 years later, we are 107, and that's insane. That's insane. And even with building all these new cities, there has been around 16 new cities that are being built within this decade. This will not contain this incredible amount of people, aside from all the other issues that they could cause, such as crime and so on, lack of proper education, and so on, and the need to build new health facilities, the need to have more arable land, and so on. And that can't stand. So I think this is the biggest threat that Egypt facing. I mean, terrorism can come and go. All countries in the world, including European Union, have suffered from terrorism at one point or another. But this could go. But this overpopulation is the main threat in my own personal opinion, to Egypt's progress.
To return to the energy issue, Mr. Pusztai, Libya used to be one of, in the past, of course, one of the main oil-producing countries. Now, could you tell us what is the situation with the National Oil Corporation? Are there exports of oil? Are there discussions? Could Libya rise again to be an oil exporting country in the immediate, at least, future? Could oil be used to unite the two parts of Libya?
Well, Libya had before the revolution a production of about 1.6 million barrels per day. This is far below the production of other countries like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, or others. So yes, Libya has a tremendous amount of oil reserves, but, and this is what I'm always telling to the European politicians, we need to keep in mind that we are talking about right now 1.2 million barrels per day, and at best in a few years 1.6 million barrels per day. So Libya will certainly not be in a position to help Europe to overcome the loss of oil from Russia, no doubt about it. But nevertheless, it is a significant contribution, especially for countries like Italy. And it is also a tool to stabilize, it would be a tool to stabilize the country if the oil revenues would be distributed in a more equal way. Right now, the way it works is that the National Oil Corporation, which is headquartered in Tripoli, makes the contracts with the international oil companies. The international oil companies who are exporting the oil and buying the oil are paying for the oil to the Libyan Foreign Bank, which belongs to the Central Bank of Libya. So this means, regardless if the oil is produced in the east, in the west, or in the south, all the money ends up at the bank accounts of the Libyan Foreign Bank. And the Libyan Foreign Bank usually is obliged to transfer this money immediately to the Central Bank of Libya, which is, of course, also headquartered in Tripoli, and which is more or less under control of the governments in Tripoli since 2012. This means the oil is produced in the east and in the south. I would say about 70 to 80% are produced in the east and in the south, and the oil revenues end up in Tripoli and are distributed in an extremely unfair way from Tripoli. And this is one of the key issues, one of the key problems in Libya. Just a couple of months ago, the chairman of the National Oil Company was replaced by Bin Gadara. Bin Gadara is a guy from the east, from Benghazi, who has quite some, let's say, good ties to the Libyan National Army commander Khalifa Haftar. Nevertheless, this did not help anything with regard to the distribution of the oil revenues, because as I've explained before, the National Oil Company is producing and exporting the oil, but the revenues end up at the bank accounts of the Central Bank of Libya. And the Central Bank of Libya, with its governor Sadiq al-Kabir, finances the governments in Tripoli since 2012. Right now, Sadiq al-Kabir is very close to Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dabeiba, the Prime Minister of the Government of National Unity in Tripoli, and he is financing his government and not the rival government of Fatih Bashaga, the Government of National Stability, which was appointed by the House of Representatives, by Libya's, I would say, internationally recognized parliament. So the kingmakers in Libya are two. One are, of course, the militias. I'm sure everyone is aware of the militia problem. And the second one is the Central Bank of Libya. If there is a government appointed by anyone in Libya, and it's not funded by the CBL, they will have, as it's right now the case with Fatih Bashaga, next to nil influence. So what could help? The American Special Envoy Richard Norland has proposed a mechanism, a transparent mechanism, internationally supervised mechanism about the use of the oil revenues. So the idea would be that the oil revenues would be only allocated and used in a transparent way. Guess who has no interest in this? The Central Bank of Libya and the government in Tripoli. But as long as there is no solution for this, there is no way that Libya can be stabilized. This problem increases the tension within Libya, I would say, month by month. Right now, we have a quite rather stable government in Tripoli of Abdul Hamid Dabeiba, who is also supported by the militias, most of the militias in the greater Tripoli area. But nevertheless, the situation, especially in the east and in the south, is getting more and more explosive because they are not having access to the money from their own oil. And I would say we could see in the next couple of months to half a year about some kind of establishment of a regional government in the east and a regional government in the south, officially under the umbrella of a government in Tripoli, but nevertheless more or less independent. They are discussing in the east and in the south to re-establish the 1951, the independence constitution of Libya. This was a federalist constitution. And people in the east and in the south are discussing to re-implement this old constitution at the beginning just with two provinces, with Fezzan and with Barca or Cyrenaica as we call it. So to have the state of Libya consisting right now of just two provinces, and the third province, Tripoli, should join this state of Libya as soon as it is stable. You could take also Cyprus as a model with the problem in northern Cyprus. Nevertheless, if they don't have access to the oil revenues, we can forget any of these ideas. Because if the Central Bank of Libya still continues to finance the government in Tripoli, they can have whatever government they want in the east and in the south. They will have no money to fund their plans. And the international community, for the time being, pays always just to the Libyan Foreign Bank belonging to the Central Bank of Libya. In the years 2015, 2016, at that time interim government of Prime Minister Abdullah Al-Tini in the east tried to sell oil on its own from a so-called National Oil Corporation in the east. This did not work. No one bought the oil, and when there was an incident when they hired a tank ship, and this was stopped by the U.S. Navy. So as long as they are not able to sell oil in the east, they cannot really establish their own government. One could say, okay, so what? The problem is, as I said before, the situation is getting more and more explosive. And this could lead to a new outbreak of violence. This could eventually lead to a new outbreak of war. And this is certainly not in the intention of any of the neighbors of Libya, especially not in the intention of Egypt, which would suffer from a new war and from re-establishment of the Islamists in eastern Libya, certainly quite a lot. Let me stress with regard to the east of Libya, President Sisi has declined in summer 2020 a red line running just to the west of Sirte, which is more or less in the middle of the Libyan coast. And he said that if this red line is crossed by Turkish forces or by militias, Islamist, let's say Islamist-led militias from Western Libya, this would trigger an Egyptian intervention. And this certainly contributed to the stop of fighting in summer 2020. And I have no doubt that if a civil war would break out and if the Turkish-supported forces from Western Libya would make it to the east, that the Egyptians would intervene with the formidable military. One must not forget, it is of vital strategic interest for Egypt to have a stable, non-Islamist government or ruler in the east of Libya. And this is also why Egypt is still dealing with Khalifa Haftar. They would deal with anyone in the east who is supporting their idea of keeping the east of Libya outside of the control of Islamists. Hany, what's your point about this?
I totally agree with you, Wolfgang. This is a crucial matter to Egypt, as you kindly mentioned the red line by President Sisi a couple of years ago. At no time in the past decades where Egypt was ready to mobilize its forces into any other country or go to war as was that time. The actual media here, we were on total alert that it was a matter of days, or if not a week or so, that we would be at war in Libya against whether it's Turkey or Libyan, it's a Libyan-backed government, and of course the militias on the ground, whether it's supported by Al Qaeda or ISIS or whatever there are. This is a crucial issued to Egypt. Egypt has over 1,000 kilometers of borders between them. These borders, since the ousting of Gaddafi back in 2011, has been nothing but trouble to the country. A couple of years ago, the Egyptian prime minister said that the Egyptian forces destroyed 10,000 cars, pickup cars, and so are armed with Libyan militias and other militias that came into the countries, whether they were full of weapons or so, trying to enter Egypt's border. 10,000 cars, and I reckon that this number has increased since as well, and this presents a clear and present danger that east of Libya would fall into the hands of Islamists or any of the Turkish-backed militias. It would be an act of war to Egypt, as kindly mentioned by you, and hence we hope that everyone would see reason and would see the light, that we don't have to drag each other into a war like this, because no handshakes between Erdogan and Sisi will stop Egypt from getting back stabilizing Libya, and no nice words will ever stop Egyptians from making sure that Libya is the peaceful neighbor that it should be. And even with the current threats of civil war and so on, Egypt is aware of that, and hoping that both sides of the equation, whether it's Haftar's side in Benghazi or Aqila's side in Tripoli or so on, see that it cannot be an Islamist government here, and Egypt cannot withstand with a new resurgence of Muslim Brotherhood-backed governments anywhere in the region.
To conclude with Libya, Mr. Pusztai, could you please tell us the equilibrium of power, of the political equilibrium in Libya between the two rival governments right now, and which countries, as external actors, support which sides?
Currently, there are two Libyan governments. There is the government of Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh in Tripoli and the government of national unity, and there is the government of national stability of Fathi Bashagha in Sirte and Benghazi. But as I've indicated before, Fathi Bashagha has next to nil influence. Yes, he can reject appointments of some leaders of authorities in Benghazi, as it did recently when the Minister of Health of the Government of National Unity has appointed a director of a hospital in Benghazi. Fathi Bashagha sacked him the other day, but he has no financial resources. He doesn't have a real influence. So right now, I would say we have one government in Tripoli, Fathi Dbeibeh, and we have parts of Libya, I would say 70% of Libya, which is outside of his control. So Fathi Bashagha doesn't really have an influence in the south. And in the east, yes, he is there, but as he has no means to influence and to shape things, his influence is extremely limited. So right now, Dbeibeh is firmly in the saddle. He's firmly in charge. Who is supporting him? His key supporter is certainly Turkey. Turkey, let me stress, we've discussed this briefly at the beginning, has strong historical ties, especially with Western Libya. There is a strong group of people, so-called Korogli, which are people descendants of former Ottoman soldiers and local women. Especially in the city of Misrata, there are 10,000 of these Korogli, with several of them have very influential positions. Let me stress that for Turkey, Libya is of key economic and strategic importance. The weak, ground down, I would say, Turkish economy needs cheap energy from Libya, and they need an export markets for their own products, and they need a field of activity for their quite strong construction industry, while they are still waiting for compensation for their financial losses during the revolution. So I'm hearing frequently from companies in the United States and in Europe that they are blaming and claiming and suing the Libyans for compensation for losses incurred during the revolution. That's the same with Turkey. They also didn't see a lot of money for what happened in 2011. And Turkey needs the government in Tripoli, as we discussed at the beginning, as a partner in the dispute about the exclusive economic zones in the Eastern Mediterranean. They need a government in Libya signing memorandum of understandings with them, which they could use as a role model, as an argument for their view about economic exclusive zones. And this means they also need to keep the country together, because from a Turkish point of view, the opposite coast in Libya is in the Cyrenaica. So if Libya would break up, if there would be two states or three states of Libya, the memorandum of understanding would be, even in the Turkish point of view, useless, because it would have been signed with the government which is not in charge in the east. Turkey also needs Libya as a springboard to the Sahel and to West Africa for power projection, but also for facilitating its economic strategy. They are using a Navy base in Homs for this purpose, and most important, the Al-Batia Air Force Base in the desert close to the Tunisian border. This is a staging area for military activities of Turkey in the sub-Saharan and especially in the West African countries. They are having some military support programs with governments in the Sahel region. And the hub for logistics, the hub for personal rotation and so on, is the Al-Batia Air Force Base. And Turkey has quite strong economic interests in the Sahel region. And I would say also worth to be mentioned, Turkey is the only one country which has direct flight connections from all African countries to Turkey, to their own capital. So there is no other state which has direct flight connections to each and every African country. Turkey is playing very strongly this African card. And I need to stress again, up to a certain amount, this is understandable, because the Turkish economy needs export markets. Most of their products are not really competitive in Western Europe. So Turkey is, I would say, the only one country which has a real influence on the government in Tripoli. Yes, there are other countries, Qatar, and quite interestingly, in the meantime, also the United Arab Emirates, who are also supporting the government in Tripoli. The Emirates are supporting, who were key supporters of Khalifa Haftar, are now on good terms with the government in Tripoli because of personal relationships, business relationships of the Dabeiba clan with some ruling families in the Emirates. So the other players are, of course, Egypt, as Hany has just explained before, are Algeria. For Algeria, it's of important strategic interest that Egypt does not expand to the west of Libya. You know that there is the Algerians are very much worried about having Egypt as an influential country, as a very mighty military power with an influence in the Maghreb region. So, and Egypt is aware of this. There are no attempts, at least no attempts that I'm aware of, that Egypt wants to expand its influence towards the west of Libya. So it makes sense. With regard to the Europeans, the situation is a little bit more complicated, especially since, I would say, the breakup of Libya in the year 2013, 2014, it was quite clear that the different strategic interests of the European countries mean that they are cooperating with different partners in Libya. Let's just have a look on Libya and on France. On Italy and on France. Italy has vital economic interests in Libya with regard to oil, with regard to gas, and security interests with regard to containing migration. In order to serve these strategic interests, Italy needs to cooperate with whoever is in charge in Tripoli. They even cooperated to a certain extent with the so-called National Salvation Government, the Islamist government in the year 2014 and 2015, because they needed to talk whoever is in charge in this region. And they are, of course, also in contact with Abdulhamid Dabeiba. On the other side, for the French, yes, economy counts too, but for them it's of key interest, one could even say of vital interest, that the stability of the Sahel region is maintained, including the interest with regard to the uranium mines in Niger and other rare ores in this area. So for them, what counts is counter-terrorism. At the south of Libya, Fezzan is a hub is a hub for terrorist activities. So they need a partner to contain terrorism in Libya. And this is not the government in Tripoli. The only one military power which has some influence in the south is the Libyan National Army of Khalifa Haftar. Therefore, they are cooperating also with the East. So strategic interests are driving who is cooperating with whom in Libya. Yes, the stability of Libya would be in the interest of Egypt, Algeria, France, Italy, and all the countries. But as it is fragmented right now, as fragmented as Libya is right now, it is simply not realistic that all these countries have overlapping interests working exactly in the same direction.
So Libya will probably remain unstable for in the near future. We now, it's it's a kind of prediction. We now move to the final part of our discussion. We shall discuss the Islamist issue. Mr. Ghoraba, recently you wrote a very interesting article on the Muslim Brotherhood and on the internal split. You mentioned that there are three factions. You wrote a very interesting analysis for the Investigative Project on Terrorism that I highly recommend. And you said that there are now three competing factions of the Muslim Brotherhood. Could you please tell us which are these three factions and where are they located?
Thank you for the question. Basically, since the early beginnings of the Muslim Brotherhood, even if after they were ousted from Egypt, mainly during President Abdel Nasser's time, they found refuge in two main countries, in the United Kingdom and Germany. But the United Kingdom was always the main hub and the headquarters of the international organization. So the main faction here, or the original one, which had the acting general guide who passed away last month, Mr. Ibrahim Munir, he was the main acting general guide, and he had feuds with the rest of the members across the world, particularly the faction in Istanbul. This faction originated or was formed after the ousting of the Muslim Brotherhood from Egypt in 2013. And they gathered there under the auspices and support of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And they formed a big, sort of a big alliance there under the leadership of the likes of Mahmoud Hussein. These are the two main factions, one in London and one in Istanbul, or Ankara, if you wish, but it's in Istanbul mainly. The third wave, they want to return back to the tenets set by Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb, the godfather of modern terrorism. And they don't believe that they owe anyone their allegiance, except that the ones that could make the group rise again from its ashes as it happened. They don't believe into negotiating their way back with the Egyptian state or government into as Ibrahim Munir said, that they are no longer in a position to try to muscle their way into power, and they give up on that quest. Before he died, months before he died, he said that that the Muslim Brotherhood is no longer seeking power in Egypt. But that's something that neither the Istanbul faction or the current the new wave of Muslim Brotherhood, or the third wave, as they say, advocates, and they believe that they could go all the way again into issuing threats and resorting to violence as they did through the past decade.
These are the three. Recently, during the Sharm el-Sheikh conference, they tried to stir up trouble in Egypt, right?
Yes. They failed. They picked up the 11th of November as a set date because they thought it's a cool looking number, 1111 2022. So for no reason, and no one showed in the streets, and no one protested anything and so on, despite all the trends on Twitter and social media that they will be out and oust the current government and so on and so on. But no one showed up, especially that most of the calls took place from people who are abroad or outside Egypt in the first place. And they have no control on what's going on in the streets. And at the same time, nobody trusts these people, whether they are even, I mean, after all, there would be some people disgruntled by any administration in the world at any time, but no one trusts the Muslim Brotherhood to lead them anywhere. Except through another circular wave of violence. And the absolute majority of Egyptians have tried that, and they're not willing to go back to these days, to like 2011 and onwards, with what happened throughout the past decade, with violence and so on. And hence, all these three factions could do little or no harm at all at the moment to the Egyptian state, especially that they have lost their support, their foundation support from the general public, which they used to rely on. They used to say that we own the streets, we have the people's voice in our side, but they no longer can claim that, because if anything turns out to be a good thing out of 2011, they said they were out in the open, their ideologies were out in the open, and they have proven that they're not any different from Al Qaeda or ISIS or so on. The only difference is that they just wear suits instead of turbans and so on, like the rest of the terrorists do. And that's in summary what they have been trying recently. They have a succession problem. No faction is recognizing the other, and they are willing to even split the group for the first time in its history. They took pride in themselves that they follow blindly the words of the general guide, but they can't decide on a general guide. At the moment, each faction claims that we are the elders, we are the ones who paid the price, we are the ones, and especially the London faction, which tried to introduce more than one candidate to lure the rest under the wing, but that didn't happen so far. And each side is trying to claim the legitimacy. The first two can claim the legitimacy more than the younger, than the youth, because they come from the elders ones. Some of them have seen and witnessed the likes of Said Qutb or Hassan al-Banna themselves, and there were some of them were in the case called case Cell 65 in 1965, where they tried to oust and assassinate President Abdel Nasser, and they failed, of course, and which resulted in some death sentence that included Said Qutb himself. So that's in summary what's happening now with the Muslim Brotherhood.
So luckily, the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood is waning. This is good news. But I remember that, yes, I remember that in Libya, Mr. Pusztai, there was an active presence in the past, at least, of the Islamic State and of both some cells of the Muslim Brotherhood. Are there still Islamist elements active in Libya? What is their influence, political or military?
Well, let me give it first a brief overview about the Islamic landscape in Libya. Yes, Libya is a Muslim country. I would say 98% are Muslim, but in between, they are very much fragmented. The traditional form of Islam in Libya was the Maliki, the Sufi Asharid form, the more mystical form of Islam, which was the majority of the Libyans followed the Sufi Asharid form of Islam. And those were not really a problem for the former ruler Gaddafi. So they were getting along more or less quite well. The other important, they are still the largest group, not the most influential, but the largest group among the Libyans. The former ruler of Libya, the King Idris I, was from the Sanusi order, which is also a Sufi order. So this is the traditional form, the more peaceful form. The next important group are the quietist Salafi, the so-called Mudkhali. The Mudkhali, who have their origins in Saudi Arabia and are also present in Egypt, are no real problem for the rulers of the countries because they accept whoever is in charge of the country. They are ultra-Orthodox, but they don't fight the ruler of the country. This means they are allowed to exist in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, and also under Gaddafi. The next groups who were a problem for Gaddafi and who are also right now, I would say, the biggest challenge are the Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafi Ilmiya, political form of Salafists, and of course the Jihadi Salafists. All these three groups, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafi Ilmiya, and the Jihadi Salafi, were fighting against Gaddafi. And he overcame this, and he had broken their resistance and jailed many of them. Others fled to Sudan and later on to either to UK or to Afghanistan. But those who were jailed by him ended up in the infamous Abu Slim maximum security prison. Today they call it Abu Slim Academy. Why? Because in Abu Slim, those guys from the Muslim Brotherhood, from the Salafi Ilmiya and the Jihadi Salafis, they suffered together. They suffered together, they were tortured by the Gaddafi guys, and they formed a bond between them. They formed a mutual understanding, and this strong bond still exists between them. The others, the Mudkhali and the Sufi, are outside of this bond because they were not challenging Gaddafi at this time. And this means these three, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Salafi Ilmiya, and the Jihadi Salafi, those are the key, I would say, challenge for the Libyan society today. They established, at the beginning of the revolution, they did not really take part because several of them were just released from jail and they feared that Gaddafi will overcome and defeat the revolutionaries pretty quick. So they kept more or less out. But over time, they got engaged, and with the financial support of Qatar and from other countries, they expanded their influence. After the revolution, these Islamists were able to take over not only the first elected interim parliament, but also most of the more powerful militias, especially in Western Libya, in part also in Benghazi, and almost all of them in Derna. So they were forming a state within the state. They were able to bring their guys, including former Libyan Islamic Fighting Group guys who were affiliates of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, into very influential positions in the security apparatus, in the financial apparatus, in the economy, and also in the that time government. So they were really able to establish a deep state. This was somehow undermined for several reasons in the years 2016, 17, and right now their influence is, I would say, by far more limited than it was in the year from 2012 to 2015. And they fear that if there are elections anytime soon, those who are remaining from them in more influential positions would be kicked out. So they have no real interest on elections anytime soon. And most of them, including the Grand Mufti Sadiq Al-Garyani, is supporting the Dabeba because they know as long as the Dabeba is in charge, there won't be elections. So in a nutshell, the influence of the Islamists in Libya, especially of these three groups, has decreased, but it's nevertheless still there. They have a huge influence on the key economic entities like the Central Bank of Libya and others. So they are still there and they want to keep their positions, understandably from their point of view. We will see if democracy, if elections are able to sort this out. The population of Libya is not so much radical. They don't really want to fight their jihad. They want to have a better life, as most people in most of the countries. Libya still has a jihadi problem. The jihadi problem is down in the south. As I've stressed already before, in Fezzan, we have a safe haven for the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. We have a safe haven for local Islamic State branches. And the government in Libya, in Tripoli, is not able to do anything about it. And the assets and the capabilities of the Libyan National Army are also very much limited. And one must not forget, the terrorist of one side is the freedom fighter of the other side. So many members of the local tribes are fighting in the fighting season in Mali, in Niger, and other countries. And they come back home to southern Libya. They are devout Muslims. They simply want to support their brothers, their friends in other countries. So for us, they are terrorists. For them, they are freedom fighters. And most important, as long as the economic situation is in Fezzan as dire as it is right now, there won't be a solution for this. There won't be a solution for this. And the people will still support terrorist organizations. They will support smugglers and human trafficking. Let me stress the last sentence. In the European Union, they are frequently discussing about enhancing border security in southern Libya. I always tell them there is no border in southern Libya. There is nothing where you could establish a border control post or something like this. As long as the society in southern Libya is as it is right now, as long as the people have no perspective, there won't be any change. And the Islamists are exploiting this.
Exactly. Thank you for this insightful and detailed analysis of the Islamist landscape in Libya. So now we can move to the final part of our discussion. We have covered a lot of issues. Now we shall have some concluding remarks by both of you gentlemen. And of course, the big issue of our times is the Russian invasion of Ukraine that has produced a new geopolitical landscape that affects the European Union, that affects also the Mediterranean, because there is the issue of food security, the issue of greater instability. So what are your estimates for the near future? How could things play out in the greater region? Will there be increased instability? Will we move on to some form of compromise in Libya? Will there be renewed tension between Turkey and Egypt, perhaps? I know for a fact that, Greece and Turkey will continue to have tension for a variety of reasons, even though they are both NATO members. So a general take on the coming periods. Mr. Ghoraba, what is your take on this?
Well, in regard to the Russian invasion to Ukraine, as I said from the very first day, that military speaking, this invasion will lead to nothing good to the Russians. The Russian forces, despite all the claim of superiority back then, it will be defeated, and Russia will pay a long-term price for this invasion. Many have objected on my assertions and my predictions on this, but time has proven that they were right. The only problem lies now is that Russian invading Ukraine has other economic impacts on the rest of the world, and that has been showing into the energy crisis, the food crisis, especially that both countries, Russia and Ukraine, have been producing enormous amounts of grains and foods for the rest of the world, which is causing serious issues for third world countries, especially in Africa and so on, which relied on their exports, as well as the energy crisis that you could see in the West, particularly in the European Union. But as that said, how long that the Russians will sustain their advance in invasion in Ukraine, I don't think it will take too long, or maybe he will try to push everything and throw everything except the kitchen sink on them on Ukraine in the next period, especially during the winter period. But at the same time, it will lead to the same conclusion that the Russian invasion will not succeed into overtaking Ukraine, and at best terms that they will try to keep what is left in the eastern borders, as these are the only gates that they could keep for a while till political negotiations take place. Definitely, this invasion had very negative impacts on Egypt and the rest of the region in terms of economic instabilities caused by that, especially even in the simplest of terms of the tourism revenue, because we had millions of Russians and Ukrainians spending their holidays in Egypt, and that didn't happen ever since. Very limited numbers coming from both countries, as well as the increase in costs of everything for travels, for oil, and so on. But that said, there's always an opportunity from crisis, and that opened up an opportunity that Egypt could be a supplier to European Union in terms of its energy needs, and whether that's through natural gas or solar energy or so on, and through allies such as Greece and Cyprus, we are connecting energy cables and using our liquefaction facilities in Egypt to export shipments of natural gas, LNG to Europe, and so on. And other countries in the region, such as Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Qatar and so on, all the major exporters of gas and oil, this presents an opportunity to them. But definitely a war in Europe will always bring instability to certain things until it ends, especially it's in almost in the center of Europe. And this presses for different initiatives in order to try to contain the situation, whether not try to de-escalate the situation. I see that there's still the Russians are still adamant to make any gains, but I don't believe that they will have it, even if they try to use other hypersonic missiles and so on civilians and so on. It's not going to work or affect the Ukrainians' resistance to a great extent, because they're also getting supplies from the United States and Europe to counter that. This has been one big miscalculation from Putin, who thought that things will fall online and according to his plan, and overtaking Ukraine in a week or something or two of these over optimistic estimations from his side. He became a nightmare. His estimations that almost 90,000 Russian soldiers may have been killed or injured, at least during the course of battle, aside from huge losses in equipment and so on. I don't think that the Russian economy will sustain that for a very long time. And I could be wrong, but But so far, I've been right in all of my estimations about this atrocious invasion by the Russians. And I think that there is opportunity for countries such as Egypt and Greece and so on to be engaged into helping mitigate this crisis, trying to resolve the energy crisis at one point, and at least try to lessen the influence that the Russians had over the European side or the West, thanks to their big oil supplies and energy supplies back then. Now the Europeans are more alert and more aware that the long-term reliance on Russia cannot continue, even if there is a new regime in power that comes into Russia someday. They cannot be over reliant on Russia, because everything could fall down at one time or another. So they need more reliable partners, whether from the East or from within the European Union themselves. The choice returning to other choices such as nuclear energy and solar energy and so on, with the imports from the Middle East and Egypt as well. That's in conclusion the way I see the things in the next period. I certainly hope that the situation in Libya doesn't escalate over the current situation. Well, maybe that would be too optimistic, but that's my hope. But the way I see things, they are not good as Mr. Pusztai kindly mentioned earlier and elaborated in full details. That situation is not good there, and hopefully we'll find some resolution that doesn't involve a civil war or an Egyptian-Turkish war on the other end. That's in conclusion what I can say.
Thank you very much for your insightful comments.
It's been my pleasure.
Dear Wolfgang, what is your take on the current or the forthcoming events?
Well, the significance of the Eastern Mediterranean has certainly been increased by the war in Ukraine. We've discussed about the energy resources, so there is no doubt about this. On the other side, as Hany already indicated, the increasing food prices contribute significantly to the destabilization of several African countries. All this needs to be kept in mind. So Ukraine does not only make Europe situation Europe more dangerous, but also in Africa. In Libya, the situation will get more tense next year. The establishment of a regional government in the east is rather likely. All this could lead to a renewed military escalation if there are no elections and if there is no way to a more just distribution of the oil revenues. My point is again that Libya cannot be sustained as one centralized country. It needs to be a federation or it will break up. Elections. We have also upcoming elections in Greece and in Turkey next year. And I expect that the situation in the Aegean will get more tense towards the elections, especially during the last days and weeks before the elections in Turkey. I would say I expect armed Turkish provocations just before the elections. Please remember that President Erdogan said we may come suddenly one night. This should be taken seriously. They could easily launch a surprise raid and occupy one of the smaller Greek islands. This should be taken into account. And if you ask me what could be done about this, I would recommend to Greece to get more involvement of the European Union. I would make clear in Brussels that Greece will not hesitate to apply the EU's mutual defense clause, Article 4.7 of the Treaty of the European Union. It states, if an EU country is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, the other EU countries have an obligation, not the choice, have an obligation to aid and assist by all means in their power, not just by diplomatic protest. I would recommend that Greece fears to become the victim of an armed Turkish aggression, unfortunately, rather soon. And the European Union would need to react to this. It's Article 42 of the EU Treaty.
I see, of course, Greece has already realized that it should rely on its own forces, in any case. So this is why it is building up an impressive arsenal in both air and sea, especially with aircraft. But of course, this is a crucial issue, and with the upcoming elections, it is something that needs to be taken under great consideration by the security apparatus. So tonight we covered a lot of issues, interesting issues concerning the Mediterranean as a focal geopolitical space. On behalf of the Foreign Affairs Institute, I would like to thank very much our two esteemed guests tonight, Mr. Wolfgang Pusztai from Wien, Austria, and Mr. Hany Farouk Ghoraba from Cairo, Egypt, who were tonight present and gave us their expertise on a lot of issues. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And I hope we can have a similar discussion in the near future.